Okay, welcome to the video packet for week 3, lab session 7. Since there's only one image packet for this week, I'm just going to go right through it. So we'll start on page 1. It's the title page, has a cross section of the brain. So, our brain model here is this half that you're seeing in the image packet. Looks like this. So we'll start up at the top here. First we see this section right here. If you look, it's a little bit textured. You see the textured where it has like lines going through it all around. This kind of upside down C shape. That is the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is this section. Again, that's the piece that goes across and kind of grips either side. It's a band of nerves, nerve fibers that connect the left and right side. So you will see it on both sides. The model, but that's the corpus callosum. Our next one going down is we have the diencephalon, and off that we have two features. We have the thalamus and hypothalamus. Our third feature being the epithalamus, that's part of the diencephalon, but you won't see that in our models. So the first thing it points out is right in the center here. You see surrounded by this ventricle, which is this orange section right here that my finger is covering and now uncovering. That section right there is the thalamus. So again, it's right in the middle in orange here. That's the thalamus. Just below and in front of, so kind of anterior, inferior, we have this kind of triangle of orange that juts out. This right here, that section, is our hypothalamus. So you can see it right there. Again, thalamus, hypothalamus. Both features within the overarching section of the diencephalon. Now if we go just inferior to our hypothalamus, we have the mammillary bodies. You can see those down here. You see where the number is right there. That is our mammillary bodies. So pretty small, but they're just inferior to the hypothalamus. Next we go to the brainstem. Now the brainstem has three features on it. The brainstem as a whole goes from here down through here. So basically this light blue section that we see. Now if you go, there's basically 3/3. The top 1/3, so up here, that's the midbrain. So the midbrain would be in this section right here. If we go kind of anterior, so in front of that, you'll see how there is a section where, if you look, there's a texture to it. So it looks like lines going up and down and then lines going across. This oval with a texture, that is our pons. So then if we go to our lower 1/3, so down here, this section is the medulla oblongata. So again, our three parts of the brainstem is midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. Now back here we have this section. It's kind of in a tan with a bit of a green tint. So you see this. All of that is the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is kind of its own section of the brain, just like the brainstem is and the cerebrum is up here. The cerebellum is this section of the brain. So you can see it all around. And then our last section here is if we go right across from the midbrain, right across that ventricle there, we have this. This right here is the corpora quadrimina. There's two sections where it kind of juts out. So those are the corpora quadrumina. Right, that's all for the first page. So if we go from here, we then flip it over. We have this page right here that has a definition at the top. At the top, the definition is the cerebrum, which is the large, round structure of the brain occupying most of this cranial cavity, divided into this two cerebral hemispheres that are joined at the bottom by the corpus callosum. Basically, like we were saying a minute ago, there's three sections of the brain. There is the brainstem, which you see in light blue here. It's what connects the brain to the spinal cord. Behind it, we have the cerebellum. And then everything else. So, everything you're seeing now that I've covered up with my hands, the brainstem and the cerebellum, all of this is the cerebrum. So one of its features is that it has a left and right half. Two hemispheres is what it's called. And dividing those right through here is the longitudinal fissure. So the longitudinal fissure runs all the way around to this point right here and around again to the back, dividing left to right. Also on here we have our gyrus, which are just any hill. So any of these sections that are raised upwards, those are gyrus. And any section that dips down, like these, or like this one, for example, those are sulcus. They're valleys. Okay, moving on to our next one. Again, my image packets might be out of order, but I'm looking at this picture right here. It's the underside of the brain. So what it's pointing out is this feature right here. It's about the shape and size of a bean on the model. Obviously the model is bigger than our brain, so our brain has to fit inside of our skull. Obviously this model is bigger, but this right here is the pituitary gland. You can see it kind of hanging off, or if the brain was split, you would see it looking like, looking like this. Again, that's the pituitary gland. And again, it points out the cerebellum just from the underside, which I kind of did in the video earlier, but cerebellum, just one of those main three components of the brain. Okay, flipping it over, we have this one at the top. There's a definition of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is just the layer of gray matter covering the brain. So just the outermost layer of the cerebrum. Just covers it all. Also on this page we have our lobes. So the first one is the frontal lobes. The frontal lobe, as the name implies, is up front. So this section right here would be the frontal lobe. You can see this sulcus right there, which divides the frontal from back here, which is the parietal. So frontal, kind of this section, and then the parietal, which goes to about right here and then cuts upwards. Behind the parietal, we have the occipital, which fills this space. And then down here, we have the temporal. To get an idea of the lobes, I would just encourage you to either Google lobes of the brain or go back to the PowerPoint. I think most of the PowerPoints that we did here in lab, depending on your instructor, of course, will have at least one picture where it's got a colorized version that makes it very clear where each section is. So I would look at that for the lobes. But again, just as a general overview, up front and kind of on the top, you have the frontal lobe. We have this sulcus right here, which divides it from the parietal back here. And then in the back, that's the occipital. And then the lower one that kind of goes across everything else, that is the that is the temporal. Okay. So again, I might be out of order, but I believe our next page shows you this image. So it's got the one where this is detached, so you'll see the big divot here and the divide right there. So it looks like this. So these are the ventricles. So the main one, we have this giant reservoir right here. The ventricles are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, which travels from the brain down the spinal cord. But this big reservoir, this big space right here, is the lateral ventricle. Then if we follow, it goes and then comes into this river that we see here. You can think of it as a river. The first section is going to be the third ventricle. From the third ventricle, we then get to the cerebral aqueduct, which is right here. So if the third ventricle makes this kind of C shape, once it starts to go down, we're in the cerebral aqueduct. And then there's this kind of pond right here. This pond is the fourth ventricle. So again, sometimes it's easiest to learn things in order as you trace them. So the flow is lateral ventricle, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, and then fourth ventricle. Flipping that over, we have this nice picture of the nerves. I would just make sure you know the number of the nerve and the name. So you could say cranial nerve 1 is the olfactory bulb. Number 2 is the optic nerve, and so on. So the only other thing I want to point out, because it's got people in the past, and it's just kind of when you're repeating things over and over and you're studying over and over, you might have missed it. But if you look down here, everything goes in order. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 11. So the last two have been flipped just because it's easier to point out on the model. But cranial nerve 12 is going to be the hypoglossal, and 11 is the accessory, but on this they have been flipped. Also know kind of their location, so I'm going to point out a few that we can spot on the models easily, and then some of the trickier ones. So it helps in person to learn this, because usually you can see it a lot clearer because you can't see what the little markings are very clearly on video. But I'll point out some very obvious ones. So if we look on this picture, you notice the olfactory bulbs are kind of these long nerves, cranial nerves that stick out, that are visible for quite some time. You can see those right here. Do you see that? That's your olfactory bulb. And then we go backwards. So if we again go back to that picture I just showed you, you'll notice there's two, if you trace optic nerve down, has these real thick nerve fibers relative to the size of the other nerve fibers. So those are down here. You can see how thick they are. So if this is our pituitary gland, it's stacked right on top of cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve, which is right there. So do know, even though you don't have a picture of it clearly in the image packets, know that those are your nerves. Let's see if we can go down. So again, a lot of the other ones are small, like here's 5. You probably can't even see that. There's just a small bump. 7 is right here. So I haven't looked over the exam yet to know what to expect, but since we're in person, or we're not in person, I would say really just focus on some of those ones that are really easy to see. So maybe look at 11. 11's pretty easy. You can see it right here. It sticks out and it's kind of longer. But other than that, yeah, I would just focus on 1 and 2, maybe 11, since it's larger. But the other ones are just kind of small and hard to see on video. So know them, know their number, know their function, know their name, but maybe not worry about them quite as much on the model right now. Save that for grad school and lecture class. Okay, we have the spinal reflex arc, which should have been explained in your lecture and also in your lab lecture. So I'm not going to go over that again, but if you do need help, reach out to the person teaching your lab and they will be more than happy to explain it to you. On the back of that, though, we have this, which is this model right here. This, just in case you didn't notice, is the lumbar spine. So L1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the sacrum. Yeah, just the sacrum. But you can see different things here. First off, you have the spinal cord. So the spinal cord just goes right through that vertebral foramen. Coming out of the intervertebral foramens, we have different nerves. Don't need to know the specific nerve names, but do know that that's the spinal cord. Know that this down here is the coccygeal nerve, so it would go through the coccyx, hence the coccygeal nerve. And then you have the sciatic nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, and also a very clinically relevant one, because you might have heard of sciatica pain or something like that. That's the sciatic nerve. Then we'll go to the anterolateral view of this. Looks like this. The only thing it points out is the disc herniation, or the herniated disc, or the bulged disc, whatever you want to call it. That is just where it's just an injury that happens where that disc kind of burst open and the internal components of it are now leaked out and inflamed and very painful. So that is what this bright red section is here. So you can see all the others nice and contained. This one leaked out. Okay, final picture. We go to this model right here. This is representative of the brain and the lower part of the skull. So right there, that is the cerebellum, which we talked about, one of our main 3 components of the brain. It then goes down. You're looking at it from this angle, I believe, in your image packet. So on top here, we have the lateral cord. Just beneath it, we have the posterior cord. And just beneath that is the medial cord. Now those cords then split to different nerves. So we have 4 nerves right here. We see the most superior one, the one on top, is the musculocutaneous. Then we go to the radial, and then we go to the median, and then the 4th one, the most inferior one, is the ulnar. So again, if you didn't catch that, musculocutaneous, radial, median, and then ulnar. All right, that's it for today. As always, if you have questions, reach out to your specific lab instructor and they will be more than happy to help you. All right, thanks. Bye.